Hi, my name is Ken Lasseson. I wrote a internet site called Microbiome Prescription, and its main purpose is to assist people which has a variety of medical conditions which are associated with microbiome shifts or GI. Today, these include things like autism, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, besides the classic ones like irritable bowel syndrome, chronic fatigue syndrome, etc. So it is trying to be a general purpose, helpful site, and in some ways I understand it is unique as no other sites offer even close to what it makes available. Now, quick highlights. It's free for personal use. There's a business plan. If somebody wishes to incorporate it in a commercial product, we can talk terms. Largely, it's a microbiome fact consolidation that is searchable. So it gathered up a ton of information from a bunch of sources. Almost all of it is reputable, such as PubMed. The data is curated, comes from PubMed, EU, and US government agency, and a few selected reputable sites. For example, Peter Danimal DataPunk site. Peter is also well known for your blood type diet works, which he did a few years back. It's not disease or condition specific, and we go beyond just providing a fact, a Wikipedia. We go and we add an artificial intelligence engine to apply this data to individual microbiome results to get more information or suggestions as to some of your issues and how you can correct them. We accept many export files or data from GI or 16x providers, uBiome, Thrive, Inside, OtherWell, and anybody who has put FastQ raw data through Sequenta Biotech or other providers. There's another one coming down the pipeline, which is Biome Insight out of the UK, and we are planning to incorporate their data shortly. What do you get? You get a list of microbiome modifiers: food, vitamins, drugs, antibiotics, supplements, things that are reported in the medical literature to increase or decrease specific bacteria. These comes out of studies. Some cases it was veterinary studies because there's no human studies done on it. If a human studies, we use it. So basically, variety of foods have found, or diets or supplements have been found to alter the microbiome. So we have gone and harvested the information there. A lot of information to harvest. I have 16 gigabytes of raw text on my PC, which is where the data came from. Source of information is always provided so that you can find out where I got this bit of information from, especially if it seems unusual, contrary to what you believe is the case, which sometimes can be urban internet myth or old studies. My favorite expression is "the facts, ma'am, just the facts." I grew up watching Detective Friday, and I have enjoyed that attitude. Just give me the facts. I want the facts. I don't want opinion. What you will get is you'll get some unique reference material which you won't find anyplace else, unfortunately. A lot of the stuff I created was because I couldn't find it, and I saw advantage for it. You can see the distribution of particular bacteria, like this one. This is a specific species, and you can see what the distribution is and where your particular values are. And one of the things to be aware of is that most labs just take an average value, and some perhaps gives a range based on the average value. There's a standard laboratory methodology which is unfortunately blindly applied to microbiome data, and the result is often being out of range or in range is actually wrong if you look at the raw data. I have on the right a nice example. You can see I have had a lot of microbiome samples done, and you can see where my values are. Some cases I'm relatively low. 15% of the people have less than I, and 85% of people have more. And then I've got up to 90% have less than I did, and 10% more. Whether this bacteria is significant is another question. But what is important is right here is a line, 75%. If you took all the samples and computed an average, which is the standard way that labs work, it would be a 75 percentile. In other words, 75% of the people will have below average values, and 25% will have above average value. To most people, that seems wrong. You would expect the average to be, quote, in the middle. It's not in the middle. It's way skewed, and that's because of the nature of the microbiome behavior. Instead of being down here, it's way up there. The range probably has some people with outrageously high values being in a normal range, and people which may have typical values being too low. Again, this information is provided for every single taxa, every bacteria level. I think we have something like 4,000 of them, which we have data on, and the data keeps growing as people upload the microbiome results. Interpreting your numbers is subjective. Is this value indicating a problem or not a problem? My usual rule of thumb adage is if you are in the bottom 5% and it's a common bacteria, that shift is probably of interest. If you're in the top 5%, it is probably of interest. So if you go up here and say, okay, so if you break the 2,000 mark, then there may be something going on that you may want to make adjustments to. Anywhere between those, hey, excuse me. Here for the bottom 5%, if you come here, I would not be particularly concerned because there's so few showing up here that there's no real shift of the curve at that point. So it is probably not significant. Again, these are rule of thumb suggestions in terms of interpretation. What you do get is you do get the ability to see where you rank in terms of other people's results, which will help you make a judgment, are you abnormal or not. Now, we also provide interpretation of results. You upload the microbiome site, people go over and click on predicted symptoms, and on the left I have an actual message from last week of somebody who shipped me a message, and as you can see, holy mother of, it's scary accurate. This girl happens to be 20 to 30 years old, and lo and behold, from her microbiome, we predicted that. It's, to quote her, it's scary. I've seen the same result from my own. It correctly predicted my age, just from a microbiome. And basically, according to her comment, guess what? All the symptoms are correctly identified from about 150 different symptoms, which we are working from at the moment, and more are being added. So we attempt to predict probable symptoms. Successfully predicting symptoms implies that the combination of bacteria are causing the symptoms. In other words, it's not the disease, it's the bacteria shifts that's causing the symptoms. With something like chronic fatigue syndrome and many other conditions, you have a whole variety of symptoms. Those symptoms are not specific to the disease. Those symptoms are specific to the bacteria shift, which the disease probably helped along, or it could be running independently. So it means that we can come back and make a speculation, which I've, for myself, have tried and seems to work, which is if you want to reduce the symptoms, you change the bacteria. The site has what changes the bacteria, which means you connect one and one together and hopefully you'll be healthier or have less symptoms. When many people do an upload, they also annotate their uploads with their symptoms. This is where we get the data from. All of this comes from people having taken a little extra step of adding their symptoms in. The payback is suddenly we are discovering relationships which are not published in medical science. Part of it is because I use a slightly different statistical methodology. I'm a professional statistician, not an MD, which means that I will often use a alternative method of detecting significance, which often can be far more powerful than the standard cookbook medical practice. I should point out something. Many of the relationships found are not at the typical level which a medical study has, which is there's less than a 5%, 0.05% of it happening by randomness. But as in 1 chance in a million of just being a random event. In other words, we are talking about far more statistically significant and stronger relationships being discovered than 95% of medical studies on the microbiome will ever come up with. Part of that comes to the methodology which we are using. We are focused on the symptoms and not on the medical diagnosis. I should point out, because I had this issue today with somebody, the predictions are dynamically recomputed. New upload comes in, you click on one of those, and right now it may be 6. Suddenly you come back to this page 5 minutes later and it says there are 7 or there are 5. And that is because we recalculate every time we get more data in, makes it a living site, and makes it interesting because things evolve as we get more data, which is good. Okay, let's go on, and we also make use of published studies. Here I should explain something. Most of the time, published studies really say nothing more than the average of the people in the target group is different than the average of the healthy control. Average of a group to an average of a group. That sounds nice, and assuming everybody is a nice bell curve and the microbiome behaves on a bell curve, it's reasonably good. Unfortunately, my experience is that it's very, very incorrect. I, in fact, have a beautiful example which I came across in the data. We have one person in the data who happens to have 85% bifidobacterium, which blew me away when I saw it, to be honest. But if that person who has certain medical condition was included in a study of 10 people, and every single other person in the group had 0 bifidobacteria, the average would be 8.5%. But the normal range for bifidobacteria is 2.5 to 5%. In other words, the target group would be reported in the studies of having a higher average level of bifidobacterium, when in reality, 90% of the people with this condition have none. We have a slight problem there, and that's one of my main concerns with a lot of the existing published microbiome studies, is there are statistical weaknesses because they make certain key assumptions which are suspect. And in some cases can be well demonstrated, like this particular case. And what we are going to try to do is to attempt to interpret this against your data. Here on the left is actually some of my own data. I am high-functioning autism spectrum, so I'm not surprised to see I have a whole bunch of matches there for the bacteria associated with autism. And what we do here is we show a little exploding sign saying, guess what? You have a match. My count is 21. Minimum count is 10. 25% or 134. I fall in the bottom 25%, which is a definition which we are using for matching up a medical study low to our results. If you're in the bottom 25%, we deem it to be a low. Similarly, for high, if you're in the top 25%, we deem you to be high. So we basically go and show your value, the ranges across the whole population base, highlight it if you are a match. And we have one more column here, which I will mention in a few moments, called include. What you can do is go and say, okay, I want to include only certain bacteria in my later analysis for getting suggestions on how to modify microbiome. So you can hand pick which bacteria are of significance. Usually very low numbers, you don't want to handpick unless there's a particular reason in terms of your count. But again, it's a subjective, and I won't get into that at the moment. But basically, we do present the ability for you to compare your results against published studies, and you can refer back to read what the published studies say by clicking on the appropriate link. We go and combine the microbiome shifts with modifiers for you. You can do it yourself. All the information is there, so there's nothing stopping you from doing it yourself and not using the tools we provide. Absolutely fine. You have lots of time. You have lots of brain cells. Go to it. To summarize what's going on is we have about 1 million facts and substances to modify specific bacteria. Good data set size. We have some symptoms which we have matches to 20 plus bacteria taxa, which means that you got getting a very complicated problem to solve. And the reason it gets complicated is you may want to decrease A and B and increase C. Some modifiers, unless it says it decreases A, B, and C, is this the best choice? Well, if it decreases 2, which I want to reduce, well, the third one, well, we're not going to bother with it or whatever. We often would do a cop-out because of the complexity. But then we get to the next level of trying to do it by hand. A value is only 0.1% of your microbiome. B is 4% and C is 11%. Like, wait a minute. Shouldn't I be adjusting things for what percentage of the microbiome it is? I don't want to be focusing on something that's only 0.1%. It's probably not causing that much of an impact. So you have another problem to resolve. Next level is, oh, wait a minute, A is in just 5% of people, B in 95% of people, and C is in 59%. How do I balance this? Wait a minute, if A is only in 5% of the people, it's unusual. But is it unusual as in something I should change, or is it just a oddball bacteria that happens to show up in your microbiome result and may not be there the next time you do a analysis? A lot of these rare bacteria comes in for a short period of time and then disappear. They're often picked up from the environment around you. They attempt to cultivate you. They fail, but they do show up in your microbiome samples. So we got all of these things which you can go and do by hand if you want. But as I indicated before, it's very time consuming and can be mentally exhausting. So say hello to artificial intelligence, which is what is up on the site. And hopefully you will be not adverse to this type of artificial intelligence. Okay, and I'll be actually far more specific. The logic which we are doing is something which I did professionally almost 30 years ago for a whole bunch of new AI techniques, shoved these old techniques out to the side. I would still say it's probably the best AI solution for the type of problem we are actually trying to deal with, is we're using a fuzzy logic expert system. So the fuzzy logic means that the data and the information which we have is fuzzy. We're not absolutely certain if it's this or if it's that. Good example is you may find 4 studies saying white rice increases bifidobacterium, and 2 studies says it decreases bifidobacteria. Now, both of those studies often have conditions. For example, there may be DNA involved, there may be location in the world, longitude does impact microbiome, there may be DNA involved. So the problem is, how do you deal with 4 studies saying one thing and 2 studies saying counter contradictory. It becomes fuzzy. Which way do you go? Do you ignore it, or do you make partial use of it, etc.? Or do you make optimistic use of it and just ignore the studies which don't say what you want them to say? I don't like the last approach. What the fuzz system attempts is balance out a variety of uncertainty and produce a list of suggestions that are probably going to change the microbiome in the desired way. Again, keyword is probably, not will. The odds are more likely that it will than picking something at random. So you have improved odds. We can deal with contradictions between studies using the fuzzy logic, which is nice. So we don't have to worry about contradictory results. The system takes care of that for you. You don't have to make a decision. We, however, have one problem, and that comes right from the studies themselves. We have no information on the relative effectiveness. Often the study will say that, oh, we did such and such, and at this dosage, we found a statistically significant increase of bifidobacterium or lactobacillus, and that's all it says. Now, does that mean that white rice is better than barley? We don't know. We have no studies comparing the two of them against each other, and probably won't ever have that type of comparison study. So we don't know how effective it is, how much of a change it's going to make, or how long it's going to take. All we can do is saying that this substance is more likely to change. How fast, how much, we have no idea. We are in the dark. And the next thing is very key. This whole engine works on the bacteria selected to be changed. It doesn't select the bacteria for you. You have to select the bacteria, and it will say, oh, this is your selection. This is the information about how to modify things. And I want to move things towards the typical value seen across all samples. I know how to do that. And it goes and computes stuff for you. Picking the bacteria is subjective. There are many possible ways of doing it. A way of doing it is sometimes called an algorithm. The kitchen sink, which is actually what I did originally and have since moved on because it doesn't produce particularly great results. And that is, we simply use every single item in your microbiome which is abnormal, and often there are red herrings in there, things which have no impact on health, but suddenly you are changing something which has side effects on other bacteria, and you just end up in a rabbit hole. The expert, and I have implemented on the site Jason's criteria for healthy gut, so you can go and say, okay, we're going to use Jason's criteria, and we're going to see how do we adjust the bacteria which he deems significant to be in the ranges that he wants to see. Nice and simple. So we are making use of an expert opinion on it, and he has spent a lot of years studying the microbiome and the literature. So that's a second approach and probably superior. If you do after you do quick suggestions, it automatically uses his suggestions. If somebody else can convince me they have experience and good recommendations based on experience dealing with actual patients, I'll gladly implement it. I'm unbiased as to the source. These are experts. They may be right, they may be wrong, but they are at least have thought things through and ideally have worked with microbiome data for long enough to have reasonably good accuracy. My preference is to hand pick, which means going through and picking only abnormal bacteria that are associated with particular symptoms which you have or medical conditions you're being diagnosed with, and which you match the pattern reported in medical studies. Similar, you match the pattern associated with symptoms, or you are close match for it. The last way is you just do an eyeball of the data and say, wait a minute, this just doesn't feel right. Should be just high. And you go and you toss that in. Again, it's hand picking. You make the call. It's your subjective judgment. Now, once you have the selection of what bacteria you're trying to modify, we now go over into the engine. The engine basically is very straightforward and tries to be as simple as possible. while giving you control. You have here, you can see I have a lot of microbiome samples, so I'm somewhat experienced, and you just simply pick the one you want. If you have a hand-pick one, then you have a reduced set here. If you have a not hand-picked one, you can go and make use of filters down here, so you can indicate how extreme do you want the values, what level of bacteria do you want. Do you want the finest level of bacteria, which usually isn't a good choice because often we have an absence of medical literature about strains. Sometimes we don't have very much about species. Often it's at the genus level. And if you want to filter it to a particular medical conditions like autism, so it will go and attempt to semi-hand pick stuff for you between them and come up with a selection of bacteria which is going to attempt to use to compute things. You can see on the right here, you have a variety of categories. For example, you can include antibiotics and antivirals. If you're an MD and you are working with somebody's microbiome, you may be interested in finding out which antibiotic works best. The other day I was looking at a chronic fatigue patient's microbiome and looked at the antibiotic use and was actually surprised because two antibiotics in the same family, tetracycline, one which was minocycline was on his recommended list, and the other doxycycline was on his not recommended list. There can be a whole variety of reasons why that may have happened. Some of it may be just simply because of different sets of data. We don't have quite the same set of data, and it makes a judgment call based on the data it has. Again, we're dealing with the problem of having fuzzy, incomplete data, which is what the system attempts to compensate for as much as it can. So we just go and we select that, and it comes up with suggestions, and the suggestions are generally given a nice list form. And if we are very restrictive, saying just probiotics, for example, it will go and says which probiotics are likely to improve your bacteria and which ones are likely to make it worse. In other words, take and stop, or increase or decrease. Sometimes I've discovered people have been taking something because people have told them they should be taking it. Being on their negative list, they stop taking it and they report back to me a week later. They're feeling so much better since they have stopped taking this probiotic. Again, not scientific, not a controlled study, just comments coming back. So the suggestions, again, are all based on PubMed studies. So there's a factual basis. It's not an opinion, not a gut feeling, not from an inference from seeing patients and trying that and making weak inferences because you don't see that many patients usually. So we have the particular species of bacteria which are recommended, ones which are not recommended, and because most people have a problem saying, okay, how to find this particular bacteria or this particular species of probiotics, etc. Often they get overwhelmed trying to do the next step. I try making it easy. I create a database of commercial probiotics, and we go and we rank them so that you can see here we have the different probiotic mixtures ranked by the degree which they sort of hit the spot or doesn't hit the spot quite as much. And then we have ones which we would predict are more likely to have a negative effect on you. In other words, if you're taking any of these, perhaps you want to donate those to somebody else. It tries to take away the confusion as to which probiotic by actually naming particular brands and particular mixtures so that it becomes much easier shopping on Amazon or wherever you are when you do your shopping. So, one more positive feature which we added is favor noise. When we enter data about modifiers, we use the terms reported in the studies. Often these are unfamiliar words which are not in the most people common vocabulary. So over here on the left, here are some suggestions of things to take. And we'll see a whole bunch of them. If I give you a quiz right now, oh, what is each one of these in which food, and which food is best for a particular thing? You'll be looking at me it's like a deer waiting in the, looking at headlights in a dark night. So up here is based on the terms used in the actual studies. Down the bottom, we go and we actually go and list foods which are inferred from the list, as in particular thing. For example, this one, thyme is strongly recommended, and clove. So you have some food choices based on the flavonoids, which you should try. Often, these items may not have actually been studied against the microbiome by themselves, but because their components have been, we can end up making an inference that you may want to try them. And then we have the flavonoids down here, and we have a whole bunch of them. And in some cases, like for example, stuff happens to be known to be a mast cell stabilizer, I toss that in because there's a subset of people who have mast cell or histamine issues. Now, if you click on any of these, you will now go and see what foods they are in, relatively ranked by the amount. And we see here we have dried peppermint for one. For number one, we find dried peppermint again. Peppermint or peppermint tea may never have been studied for this particular bacteria, or combination of bacteria. But by inference, we see that peppermint or peppermint tea is a likely good suggestion to try and see what's going on. Then we hear other things which are rare, like this one, which is quince jam. Okay, usually I wouldn't have thought of quince jam as a remedy for microbiome dysfunction, but there's some evidence suggesting that it could be a benefit. Okay, at this point in time, I should say that this is the start of a journey for you. There's a lot of information. There's a lot of having to adapt your thinking and your way of looking at things. The key takeaway I think of it is stop looking or thinking in terms of dealing with the microbiome in terms of you having a diagnosis. Start thinking of what are your symptoms. For some conditions like chronic fatigue syndrome, you remove all the symptoms, you're in remission. And nobody can say contrary because there's no test for the condition that is universally accepted. What you probably will find is that the commonly associated tests have all improved, and since you're symptomless and chronic fatigue syndrome is based on symptoms, you're done. Similar for fibromyalgia, you have none of the symptoms of fibromyalgia. Voila, you don't have it anymore. So, for a lot of medical conditions, eliminating the symptoms or reducing the severity will often put you into technical remission. The site attempts to provide you a lot of accurate information, including links back to the data source. It's an open source, open research site. That means you know what's going on, you can read it, study yourself, and see whether or not you agree or disagree. The site data is constantly being updated. It's a living site. At least once a month, I go through and scan through every PubMed article dealing with any microbiome taxa to see if any new information could be added. That's why our number of facts are so big, because we're constantly adding to it. Often, it may not answer the typical naive questions you may ask. You ask a question, and which is how you want to get an answer, and often this site won't give you those answers. For example, what do I need to recover from ME/CFS? Or how do I improve autism? Those are general, vague, to me extremely vague questions which cannot be answered, and this site won't give you a definitive answer. What it will do is will help answer questions framed in reference to one person's specific microbiome and their symptoms or diagnosis. In other words, it is uber specific. It's completely personalized medicine. One thing which I don't include, which I don't think I will for a while because it's another harnessness of data, which is DNA. DNA and microbiome interact with each other, and we don't have enough data to make it worthwhile spending the energy at the moment. 2 years from now, I may change my tune, but at the moment, it's not worth it. So the microbiome is the end of the scope of getting actionable data. I should make mention to one thing, because some people have been surprised, is all suggestions should be reviewed by your medical professional before trying. Some may be inappropriate for other medical conditions you have. For example, suggesting wheat and you're gluten sensitive, suggesting licorice and you happen to have high blood pressure. Licorice will increase blood pressure. So everything should be reviewed with a medical professional. Most of the time you take in the list and say, this is what I want to change my diet to. They look over it, and if nothing jumps out, they say, okay. And now, well, technically you're under medical supervision. As in a doctor has looked at your changes of diet and have, quote, approved it, or at least not objected to it. Sign approval. A few people, however, was surprised to see Roundup as a suggestion. And I'll explain very simply how it happened. Is there was a study on its impact on the microbiome, so we included it. It was a study on arsenic and its impact on the microbiome. I will include it because I want to be totally unbiased. I don't want to do any filtering of facts which come up, because sometimes one fact leads to some interesting additional ways of thinking about something. For example, let's go back to arsenic. Arsenic has an impact on the microbiome. Now, if you happen to be like I happen to be in a water system that has not high within the safety limits, but significant amount underneath the safety limit of arsenic in the water, having that information of how arsenic modifies the microbiome can be helpful for me to know how to counteract the impact that low-level arsenic may have on my microbiome. Hence, arsenic makes sense to have there. Simply with Roundup, if you happen to be an agricultural worker exposed to Roundup a lot of time during the day, knowing how the Roundup will impact your microbiome gives you an advantage. Key thing is, this is raw data straight from PubMed and other solid sources. You have data, you have some tools to use it, and you have to do exploration. You have to try and experiment with different ways of approaching it, trying the suggestions. If suggestion doesn't suit you, ignore it. They're just suggestions. They are not prescriptive. You don't have to do it, but try shifting towards what the suggestions for increase are, and try shifting away from the things for the decrease. If you love ice cream and it says cut back dairy, okay, so you have less ice cream a week. You can probably live with that. You don't have to absolutely cut it off. These are suggestions. Again, see your doctor for a review to make sure there are no risks that you may not be aware of given other medical conditions. That's about it. Go enjoy the site, make use of it, spread the word. And remember, microbiome changes, so I suggest at least once every 6 months. When I was having health issues earlier this year, I was doing it every 6 weeks. And that was determined by simple logic. It took 3 weeks to get my results back. I made changes. I waited for 3 weeks on the changes before I did the next microbiome. So it was 6 weeks. If I could get the microbiome site back in a day, then it would probably be every 3 weeks. But you don't want to take a microbiome site until after you have implemented the last changes for a reasonable length of time. For myself, I deem 3 weeks to be such a reasonable length of time. Okay, I'll shut up or else I'll slip back in teacher mode and just keep talking till the bell rings. Okay, bye-bye.